We're going to talk to Lee Stranahan, and of course, we've talked to him before. He's been a reporter from a wide variety of news outlets, from Breitbart to Huffington Post. You can find him at thepopulist.us, also on Twitter at Stranahan. I know you wanted to talk about what's happening with George Soros and his war on law enforcement in Florida. You got a whole series on that at thepopulist.us.
I think this is especially important, David, because it's police week, and we've already had 2 cops shot and 1 killed this week. This is when we honor police. George Soros has been engaged last year. He spent millions of dollars in local races. And he's had an effect in Florida. A state's attorney he helped elect, said she's not going to file the death penalty on any cases, including that of an alleged cop killer. I have it at thepopulist.us. We're going to have more coming on this. This is how Soros doesn't just affect things internationally and nationally, but he's now working on a local level, David, and it's very dangerous, especially to law enforcement. The way I like to work is, and what we're doing at The Populist, is I give people enough material, completely vetted research material. There's no conjecture here, so people can look into it themselves, because I've noticed people who like news like digging into stuff, right? And so sure. George Soros last year launched an initiative where in 11 different states, he began putting money into municipal and state attorneys' races. Now, this is really smart. Don't forget, George Soros, I don't like the guy, but he's a genius. Okay, he's an economic genius. And he realized, simple economics, most of these local district attorney races, people spend like $1,000. Does that, you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the old slogan, think globally and act locally. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's working at the grassroots level. That's why it's so difficult to get people to act at the local level. They only want to look at politics at the highest level, at the national level. Usually only at the presidential level do they get interested. That's
right. And Soros saw an opportunity here. And so what he did was, and again, this is verified by Wall Street Journal, Politico. This is no conjecture here, okay? He put money into 11 different races. He helped knock Sheriff Joe out of Maricopa County, for instance.
Yes. Spent a lot of money there, yeah.
The way he did it's real simple. In most of these races, he could put $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 into a race. In the case, for instance, in New Mexico, in Bernalillo County, the Republican opponent literally had to withdraw because he was being outspent so badly. He literally just said, I quit, okay?
Wow.
Now, this was very effective. And because it's happening on a state and municipal level, it sort of rolled under the radar. There were a few, like I say, Politico wrote about it, Wall Street Journal wrote about it, Daily Signal wrote about it, but there were some national stories, and I wrote about it a little bit too, because you have to remember, of course, David, George Soros was also a big funder of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things I detail in that Populist story, I did a big 3-part series, because people often ask me, they'll say, what's Soros after? Right? What's his goal? And I know what his goal is. The Black Lives Matter movement, one of their goals is literally prison abolition. Okay? And that's because they're spiritual, they're not just spiritual. The grandfather of the Black Lives Matter is founded by 3 women, Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi. Patrisse Cullors' mentor was a guy named Eric Mann. Eric Mann was a weather underground radical and associated Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorns. And what they believed in was what the Black Panther Party believed in 1966. It's in their program. They want to release every black person from prison. That's their explicit goal. Their argument is that no black person has ever received a fair trial in the United States because it's a racist country. That's their argument. So Eric Mann wrote a book about this guy, George Jackson. His girlfriend was Angela Davis. You've heard about Angela.
Oh, yeah.
Free Angela with the hair. And Angela Davis is the inspiration for Michelle Alexander. Michelle Alexander wrote the book, The New Jim Crow. And Angela Davis is a prison abolitionist. She's written major works on this. Michelle Alexander, there's video of her up. Just Google on YouTube, Angela Davis, Michelle Alexander. And you'll find Michelle Alexander sitting next to Angela Davis saying, this is my inspiration. So what they talk about is and here's the way they sell it, David, and it appeals to libertarians, so it's interesting. they'll say mandatory minimum sentences. Well, you end up with nonviolent drug offenders, and we need to ease up on nonviolent drug offenders. Now, that's an argument that I think for people like you and I is probably pretty compelling. We'd go.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I covered that yesterday. I talked about Senator Rand Paul saying, you don't know what the real Jim Crow laws are. It's the mandatory minimums, because that's what's locking up people. And we know that black people are not using drugs at a higher rate than white people are, but they're going to prison at a much higher rate. But the mandatory minimum thing is just drug prohibition, the drug war in general, is something that is very troubling. And I think that Attorney General Sessions' movement to restore this mandatory minimum stuff, I think that is really going to backfire on them politically. And I think it's going to feed this whole Black Lives Matter movement.
I've said the same thing, and I got to point out that I'm sympathetic to that argument, but I want to point out the danger here, because there is one. I could show you video of the leaders of this movement, including a former Symbionese Liberation Army. Remember the SLA, Patty Hearst?
Yeah.
Former SLA guy. They admit that they use the nonviolent drug offenders. They say, look, there's only a few 100,000 of those nonviolent drug offenders. Our actual goal is to release 11 million people from prison. By the way, 11 million people from prison is the entire prison population. I could show you video where they admit that. So the danger is they're very smart, you see. They understand they need to get a little bit of a coalition going. And so they understand libertarians like Rand Paul, like the Koch brothers, okay, will come out and they're in favor of that. And again, I'm sympathetic to that argument. I think especially when it comes to, I agree with you. Nobody who voted for Donald Trump wanted Jeff Sessions to go after marijuana users. Nobody. Okay? That being said, I think we need to be a little careful of what the end goal is. And you can keep both of those things in mind, right? You can say...
And I think when we look at George Soros, the bigger picture, the final end game, I believe, is something like we've seen in the color revolutions that he's funded throughout Europe in terms of creating and he has to have a good cause here. And what they have done throughout Europe is basically they create revolutions, I think, based on based on economic classes. Here we have the sense of upward mobility except for racial classes. So what they try to do is they try to create and build on this racial division. That's what Bill Ayers and the rest of them have historically done to sell their communist movement when they brought it here. They brought it here based on a racial movement rather than economic classes like they did in Europe. And I think that's really where this is headed. Would you agree?
I 100% agree. And not only that, let me prove your point. We talked about this. I was in a film called Occupy Unmasked with my friend Andrew Breitbart, directed by Steve Bannon. In Occupy Unmasked, which is about the Occupy Wall Street movement, Anita Moncrief is one of the people in the film. She says at the end, the next step in this is going to be moving it to race. Yes. Because if you look at Occupy Wall Street, it was about class, 1% versus 99%. Right. And it didn't really kick in.
That doesn't work in America, but race does work in America. Yeah.
Exactly right, which is why the next iteration of it was Black Lives Matter, which directly connects to Occupy Wall Street, but they've changed the tactics. Now, by the way, where's Black Lives Matter moved now? What's the current state of the movement? Antifa.
Yes.
The current state, we went from Occupy Wall Street. I see a line between Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter. And by the way, if you trace the line back, you go to the WTO Battle for Seattle in the 90s. And if you keep tracing it back, you get to the Weather Underground. I mean, when I say this, literally, Eric Mann is the mentor of Patrisse Cullors from Black Lives Matter. He recruited her, his word, when she was 17 and a half years old. She spent the next 12 years with him learning revolutionary organizing. Then she started Black Lives Matter. So when I say a direct line, I mean literally she learned at the feet of Eric Mann, whose hero was George Jackson, who was connected to Angela Davis directly. I mean, not just connected; they were lovers. I mean.
Oh yeah. Well, the whole thing goes back. If you look at Bill Ayers and you look at the fact that it was the Weather Underground that created white skin privilege. They've now shortened it to white privilege. And then he stopped bombing buildings and started educating kids in his propaganda, his racialism. That really is the foundation of what we're looking at here. So give us a spin on what he's doing, what Soros is doing now with these local races with law enforcement and how this is playing out in Florida.
Well, so remember, I mentioned the history only to say, look, there is a goal. Because people say, well, what's Soros's goal? I think his goal is he's anti-law and order, ultimately. That's what he is. Now, in these 11 different races...
Well, he just wants chaos, because as chaos breaks down, then they create chaos throughout the West, and they can establish themselves in their new order.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's he's making a little more money than the people who are working in the movement that he funds, right? So,
he'll really like law enforcement when it's doing everything that he tells it to do. He'll love law enforcement. You'll get it good and hard then at that point. The boot in the face,
Now, so what's happened in Florida is he helped elect a woman named Aramis Ayala, okay? Aramis Ayala came in under Soros. Now, again, I don't like conjecture. How do I know Aramis Ayala knows about Soros? Well, here's how. There was a guy named Lloyd. He killed his pregnant ex-girlfriend, so killed her, the unborn child, and a female police officer in Orlando. You remember the story about the female police officer in Orlando being killed.
Yes.
This guy, they did a manhunt. Allegedly, he killed him, right? A manhunt for 11 days, okay? Forgive me, for a week. It was a week-long manhunt. Okay, so Aramis Ayala comes out in a press conference and says, I'm not going to seek the death penalty against Lloyd. And by the way, I should point out something. And I'm mixed on the death penalty, too, okay?
Yeah.
I'm hesitant to put that power in the state's hands. But interestingly, Governor Rick Scott had, and I am in favor of this, had made it harder to institute the death penalty. He'd he'd signed a new bill into law that means that a unanimous jury decision is required for a death penalty. I'm in favor of that. If you're going to have the death penalty, make it difficult, okay? So even though he'd done that, Aramis Ayala came out and said, I'm not going to pursue the death penalty in the case of this alleged cop killer, and I'm not going to pursue it anywhere. The police wrote to her and said, what are you doing? We want this decision to be in the hand of a jury. She did not write back to the police, never wrote back to the police. But what she did do, and we know this by some great reporting from a local TV channel, TV6 down there. Michael DeForest is the reporter's name. Great work. She texted the leftist friends, the advisors, and said, what do I do if I'm asked about this Soros question? That's literally what she said. So like I say, there's no conjecture on my part that she's keenly aware of the Soros issue. So a lot of people in Florida. Now, then what happened was Rick Scott pulled her off the case, and now she's suing to get back on the case. And really, pretend you're not in Florida. Pretend you don't care about.
And let me interject this too. In your article, you say she also there was $1.4 million that was given to a political action committee by George Soros that ran ads for her, supporting her in her political campaign.
That's right. This was a big campaign. I forget what the amount was, but it was a lot of money poured into that campaign to win. By the way, interestingly, this goes back to what we said. You know, the Weather Underground used to refer to the Black Panthers as the vanguard of the revolution. Their theory was, let the minorities lead. That was what the Weather Underground split, by the way, from the Students for Democratic Society was about whether we should let the minorities lead. Interestingly, I mentioned that history because everyone who George Soros ran was a minority member. Everyone was Hispanic or black. Interesting, right? Now, again, I'm not racist. He apparently is.
Yes.
It's an interesting coincidence that he was letting that be the vanguard of the revolution here.
Yeah, he's absolutely trying to start a racial revolution here, racially based revolution. Yes. That's
my point. And to be able to say, well, what, are you opposed to an African-American woman being a state's attorney? To which my answer is, it depends on which one. It's the same thing. You know, there are plenty of white guys whose politics, Chuck Schumer, I could just go down the list of white, Bill Clinton, white guy.
Yeah.
Kind of a good old boy, right? Not a big fan of his politics. So I don't have that kind of litmus test, right?
Yes.
Thomas Sowell, right? And
Yeah.
but that's the way that he ran this race. And it happened, not just, look, he did it in Arizona, he did it in Illinois, he did it in Texas. He did it all over the country, 11 different states. And we're just starting to see, and the reason I want people to be aware of this, especially during Police Week when we honor our fallen police officers, is that this story is going to be affecting municipalities. It's going to fly under the radar.
Yes.
And here's the other thing that disturbs me, David, and you and I have talked about it. We know for a fact that Jared Kushner, president's son-in-law, big advisor, has direct ties to George Soros.
Yes. Yes.
We know for a fact that Stephen Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary.
Yes,
So
deep
what I'm
ties,
saying
yes.
is,
Deep financial ties, yes.
Soros is as opposed, I believe, and I think you do too, that Trump is the fact that they lit up did you see the White House lit up blue last night?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, here's a guy who I know in his heart, Trump is a law and order guy.
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
I don't
a bit more than I would like to see in many cases when it comes to things like civil asset forfeiture and other things like that. But that absolutely is something he's passionate about.
And that's why I think, because people are like, well, do you think we were tricked? No. I mean, I don't think Trump's being disingenuous with his respect for law enforcement. I think he's got people in there, Mnuchin and Kushner among them, who have a very different agenda than he does. They're simply put, they're globalists, right?
Yes.
And they're down with the globalist agenda, right? And so that's my other broad concern here, is if there were no Soros connections, who I feel are going to be a moderating influence. Does that make sense? Like that's honestly,
and that's the key. That's the thing that's concerned me from the very beginning when I started seeing some of the people that Donald Trump was picking for his cabinet. We all heard the expression that personnel is policy, and the people that are going to be there, they're going to get that policy in place because it's just such a large, complex government. If those of us who are libertarians understand that government was never designed to be this concentrated, this centralized, this complex. They've gotten into all these different areas that they should never have been in. But you're never going to be able to control this or even minimize it in any way if you're going to have people that are opposed to your agenda. And he's got a lot of people there that are opposed to his agenda. And we're seeing the fruit of that now.
And we're barely seeing the sapling of it, unfortunately. Here's why I say that. When you got a guy like Gary Cohn, Democrat, registered Democrat, was recently asked by Gayle King in an interview, what's a nice Democrat boy like you doing in the Trump administration? And he's head of the National Economic Council. He's making appointments, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's a hardcore, big-time Democrat supporter. Yeah.
He is. And he's appointing other people. So what I'm saying...
And I've asked that question, too. What is a Democrat boy like him doing in the administration? Many of us are.
I think a lot of Trump supporters should ask that, too. Yeah. And here's the thing. I'm very sympathetic that the president is fighting a multi-front battle. He's got the media that I see in the White House press room fighting him every single day. And the way they do that is with this omnipresent narrative where they just keep hammering and hammering and hammering and hammering.
Absolutely.
And, I do a lot of periscopes, and someone was like, well, you should do fewer periscopes. And I said, you know what? I'm competing against 24-hour MSNBC, 24-hour CNN, 24. I'm like, I'm not doing enough. You know what I mean?
Like, I understand. Yeah. We all feel that way. We all feel that way. It's a 24-hour cycle that everybody's going through. Well, I think it's very key. This article and the way you've laid the facts out here so people can do their own investigation and put all this stuff together is very important. People will find this at thepopulist.us. And I would say, Lee, as we look at this, the key thing to take away from this is that we're very vulnerable at the local level. That's been one of our brakes that we could put on this centralization of power and the way things are going in an unlibertarian, unconstitutional way. But now we've got somebody like George Soros, who is very clever, who has a lot of money, and who will commit millions to small local races and absolutely swamp that race. And so that's why it's very important for people to pay attention to what's happening locally. As we all said, they think globally, but they act locally, and now they're funding races locally in a massive way to get exactly what they want in a very strategic way.
Let me tell you just one other thing I'm going to have up at the populist.us event pretty soon is a sort of mini manifesto on an idea. It's exactly what you said. Look, Trump is a populist nationalist. I came up with this idea a few months ago. We did a little press conference about it up in Twin Falls, Idaho, dealing with the Chobani situation up there. Mm-hmm. It's what I call populist localism. It's applying populism on a local level because you can't fight oligarchy just up here. You have to fight it. The people who, look, on the left and right, the people who are giving big tax breaks to Walmart at a local level.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Or doing eminent domain at a local level to help Walmart, let's say. And I'm not picking on Walmart. I'm just saying. No,
yeah, but it's always the big guys. It's always the big guys like Chobani that gets a nearly $1 million loan from the Small Business Association. I had small businesses. My dad had small businesses. My grandparents had small businesses. We never got 8 cents from the government to run our business. But these guys, just like the people who have stadiums, they get the local, the state, and the federal government in many cases to subsidize what they're doing. And who's subsidizing it? It's the workers and the people who have small businesses.
That's right. And so I really think the way to fight this, and I ran this idea by Steve Bannon before he was part of the administration. I said, I'm working on this idea of defining populist localism. And he was just like, love it. He got it immediately. Mm-hmm. He's like, you really got to talk about that. This is a way, I think we're at a really interesting point, David. The left and right labels in a lot of cases no longer matter. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And we saw that in France. You got a guy who comes in, he's a banker. What does he do? He takes somebody from the right-wing party. He adds people from the left-wing party. But the key thing is they have to be pro-EU. So, again, we see it's nationalism versus populism. Even there, the left-right paradigm doesn't make it. Even in the place where it began in France, it has absolutely no currency today.
Yeah, that's right. People ask sometimes, well, how were you? You wrote for the Huffington Post. How are you on the left? And I tell them I didn't like George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. And guess what, David? I still don't like George W. Bush. Still don't like him.
We both agree on that. Thank you so much, Lee. And you can find Lee at thepopulist.us. You can find him on Twitter at Stranahan, Lee Stranahan. Thank you so much, Lee.
Always great to spend time with you, David. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
The reason InfoWars Life has 5-star ratings on major third-party sites is because I want products I'm going to use for my family. I take this, my family takes this, and then it funds the operation with the most hardcore, truthful information you're going to find anywhere. So what you find in our news is the same thing you find in our products at InfoWarsLife.com.
If I ever forget to take them, I have a noticeable difference. I don't feel good. The nascent iodine is one of the ones that was life-changing for me.
Yeah, I actually have just run out of my super female. I had a few bottles at my house, and I've been taking it again, hitting the gym once again. Very exciting, feeling great, looking good. So, and I know my hair is luxurious once again. So obviously the super female is amazing. I love it.
Nascent iodine is essential. Survival Shield X2. If there's one product that I would say is life-changing that I would suggest, it's Nascent iodine Survival Shield X2. It's got a 5-star rating.
It's a win-win. InfoWarsLife.com.